Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be going over UI testing in our Swift UI app. And you may remember this app from a recent video where we've got a sign-in process that's got a little delay here to mimic a real sign-in. And then it just adds numbers together, and we can also sign the user back out. If you're ready to get started adding UI tests to your app, then stay tuned. Let's learn together. Alright, so we'll just do a quick walkthrough of the app just so that we get a quick refresher on exactly how this app works. So our app has a view model here that conforms to observable, and it will try to add two numbers together. If either of those numbers is negative, then it will throw our custom error that says no negative numbers. And then we can also sign the user in with a slight delay here, and then we can sign the user right back out. Now our math view is pretty simple. It's just got two text fields that accept numbers and a calculate button that tries to add those numbers together. And then if the answer worked out, then it'll display the answer, and if there was some sort of error, then it would display that. And our sign-in view, again, pretty simple. If the sign-in process is loading, then it shows our progress view. And if we are signed in, then we'll show the sign out text. And if we're not signed in, then we'll tell the user that they can click this button to sign in. So again, very simple view here. Let's get started by adding a UI testing target to our app. So to do that, we will go to the file menu of Xcode, and we will say that we want a new target, and we are going to search for UI in our targets here, and we'll choose UI testing bundle, and then we'll click next. Nice. And so we've got demo testing UI test. So we want to make sure that this has the word UI in it, because our unit test that we already added in a recent video doesn't have the letters UI in there. So let's go ahead and make sure we got that, and we do. So then we'll click finish. Nice. And so that has added a new file over here to our project. So let's go ahead and check out what we get. So we've got some boilerplate code here that we get for free, dealing with setting up specific tests, tearing down specific tests, and it's even given us a example test that just launches the app. And then we've also got a performance test here. Now, we're not going to go over the performance portion of this UI test today, so for now, we'll just comment that out to get it out of our way. And we also won't need any of the setup or teardown features, so we can just go ahead and get that out of our way too. In fact, let's just go ahead and clean this up. That way, we can focus on exactly what we want to work on today. And then we've got another testing thing over here. So this test file also is not really needed for our test today, so we'll go ahead and we will delete that one as well. So let's just move that to the trash. There we go. Great. So the first thing that you need to know about UI testing is it is a little more complicated and a lot more finicky than dealing with UI tests. So it's very finicky because you are trying to automatically interact with a simulator in the same way that a user would interact, but you're not physically clicking the buttons. You're looking for either specific labels or specific IDs, and then you're trying to interact with the app through various accessibility components. So let's go ahead and let me just show you what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and clean up our boilerplate code here that we got for free. So let's get that out of the way. And now in the new version of Xcode, Xcode 26, there is a nice record button here, and it usually works pretty well, but it's still got a little bit of bugginess to it, similar to the way that UI testing did in previous versions of Xcode. So let's go ahead and click our record button, and we will launch our app and actually run through, and we'll just do an example happy path flow. Now, happy path means that everything works successfully and everything is good. So when the app launches, we will click sign in, we'll go through, we'll add some numbers together, and then we'll make sure that the answer is there. There we go. So now our app is launching. And we can see over here it's already written the code to launch and activate our app. And there we go. So we've got our sign in button, so let's click sign in. And then we'll go ahead and click our progress spinner to make sure that that displays. And then we will just click calculate and make sure our answer is 0. And then we will sign out. Great. So now we can come back over here. We can tell it to stop recording. Alright, so after you've done a recording, you always want to go through the code and look at it and make sure it actually makes sense. Sometimes you may accidentally click on something or accidentally do something, or it may select something that you may not have meant to click or act on. And so as we can see here, we're activating our app, which is good, that's what we want. And then we are signing in, and then we're making sure that we have our progress indicator here in this line. And then we just click the calculate button. We make sure that our answer is 0. Perfect. And then we click the sign out button. So now an easy way to make sure that that test actually works is to just run it and see if it works. So let's go ahead and give that a run. There we go. Build succeeded. And then it will run through our simulator. So let's open that up here. Nice, so it's installing the app on the simulator. There we go, it launched the app. It clicked sign in. It should be making sure there's a progress indicator. And it said there's no calculate button. Okay, so this is the first point that we've already run into in our very first test, where this is probably the most finicky part of writing any kind of test is the UI test. So that was actually the reason why we originally put that delay in here, is because I knew I wanted to write a UI test for this. So whenever you are dealing with this UI, it's expecting that all of those elements exist immediately as soon as it runs across this line of code. Now, as we know from looking at our code over here in our view, when we click sign in, we are actually sleeping for 3 seconds while it fakes a network call. And so it failed to click our calculate button because there was a delay in the view, and so this calculate button didn't actually exist. Now, even though we waited whenever we were recording this test, our recording didn't actually figure out that we were waiting for that thing to exist, and that thing being our calculate button. And so it didn't wait either whenever it was running through our test. It just immediately clicked sign in, immediately clicked on the indicator, and then tried to click calculate even though it wasn't on the screen yet. So we can fix that by waiting for the calculator button to exist. So let's go ahead and let's say that we want to let our calc button equal our app dot buttons, and it will look for a button with the label of calculate, and that'll be our calc button. And then we are going to say we're going to check that our calc button exists by saying that our calc button dot wait for existence, and sure, we'll give it a 5-second timeout. Great. So we will assert here, we will XCT assert true, that our calc button exists before we move on to the next step. So once our calc button exists, then we actually want to replace this app button of calculate with our calc button. And we don't need the first match anymore because we know we've already got that specific button. There we go. So what we changed here was, instead of immediately clicking our calc button, now we're going to wait for that calculate button to exist, and we're going to give it up to 5 seconds before it would fail this test. So now let's go ahead and rerun our app, and let's see how that works out. Great. So as we can see, we've got our sign in, we've clicked sign in, we've checked for our progress indicator, we've clicked sign out, and everything looks like it passed. Nice. Yep, and we've got our green check marks here. So everything worked great for that test. Now that we've got that test working, let's just rename this to something useful. And so UI test naming is very similar, is using XCTest. So you have to start your functions with the name test. Unlike Swift testing, this hasn't been updated in a while. So let's go ahead and let's name this test basic math function. There we go. All right, so that is one happy path test. Now let's go ahead and let's make another test. And so we will say that this is a func test adding numbers together, and it can throw just like that. Cool. All right, and then let's go ahead, and as you can see here, our record button isn't showing up on our line numbers. Again, this is, like I said, probably the most finicky part of your whole Xcode experience. So we'll just click off of that line and click back in, and now you can see we've got our record button. So let's go ahead and click our record button, and let's add a couple different numbers together instead of just sticking with the defaults. And as you can see here, it's not actually listening and launching our simulator when I click the record button. So let's try clicking out and clicking back in, trying that again. Or let's try rerunning the test, see if that gets it to register. Cool, so we'll just go ahead and stop it so we don't have to wait for the whole test. Now we've got a play button here for this test, and it's registered that this is actually a test. So let's try to start our recording again. There we go, looks like that worked. So now we will click sign in. We'll check our progress indicator is there. And let's change this to, and we'll get our keyboard displayed here. It looks like it's not displaying our keyboard here. So we'll change this There we go. It looks like it stopped responding for a second to any of my keyboard presses, and it's still not responding. There it goes. It's added everything we've done here. All right, so let's try. There we go. Okay, cool. So now let's try adding two numbers together. Let's add number 1 and number 2 together. And in fact, it's gotten a whole lot of extra junk in here from where it wasn't responding. So let's just go ahead and let's kill our test. And let's just try that again. Let's get rid of all this stuff where it messed it up. And let's try to rerun our test and try that one more time. There we go. So let's click sign in. We'll add our progress spinner. Great. And now we'll try to check to click into the first box. And it's not responding for some reason very quickly. So there we go. And we will click backspace and we'll say that this is 1. And then we'll change this to 2. And then we'll calculate and we should get an answer of 3. Great. So now we are ready to stop our recording. And let's run our test and see if that worked. So we'll click run. And then it's reinstalling the app on the simulator. Great, we're clicking sign in, clicking our progress indicator. And again, it was trying to tap elements before they actually existed on the screen. So let's go ahead and we'll do the same thing for this test that we did for our previous test, and where we actually wait for that thing to exist before we move on. So we will say that our first number field is equal to our app.firstNumber here. So we will move that there. And then let's go ahead and let's check that our first number field exists by saying that we are going to check for our first number field, and we are going to wait for it to exist, and we'll give it 5 seconds, and then we will assert true that that exists, which is great. And then We don't need this to be called element anymore because we've already got our first number field here. So let's just go ahead and replace element with first number field. And then again, we don't need this code here. And we can replace that with our first number field as well. There we go. So let's try rerunning our test one more time. And we'll pull up the simulator here. All right, so we've got our app running. We click sign in, should be checking for our progress indicator. And it failed to get our activity indicator. So our progress indicator failed to work. So let's just rerun that test one more time without changing anything and see if it works this time around. I wasn't kidding when I said that this UI testing stuff was probably the most finicky part of Xcode. So there we go, we've got our sign in button. We should have our progress indicator. There we go. And it looks like the delete key didn't exactly work as expected, but our test passed, so that's good. So let's go ahead and let's see. So we are trying to type the delete key here, but that didn't actually delete anything. I don't know if you caught that. If you want to back the video up and check it, it just put the 1 and the 2 at the end of the 0, which that's not what we were looking for at all. We actually wanted it to replace the 0 with 1 and 2 in their respective fields. So in order to do that, we could actually say that we want our app, instead of our first field to type things, we want our app to type a text, and the text that we want is delete, just like that. And let's see if that fixes it for our first text field before we move on to our second one. So we will rerun our test, and we'll pull up the simulator so we can watch the test while it goes. Alright, so we click sign in, should be checking our progress indicator. Well, it typed the text of delete, it didn't type. So on our app, instead of in our first number field, we want to type the key, and the key that we want to press is the delete key. So let's rerun our app, and we want to tap that key. There we go. So let's go ahead and see if that fixes our test. Alright, so now we should be clicking sign in and checking for our progress indicator. Yep, it was a little slow on the sign in, so let's just rerun our test and try that one more time. Great, so we clicked sign in, we should be checking for our indicator. And it didn't tap the delete key, and that's because it is a lowercase delete, not an uppercase delete. That was my bad. Alright, let's rerun our app, or rerun our test and try it one more time. So we'll bring up the simulator so we can watch the test run. Great, we've got our sign in, we should be clicking that and then checking our progress indicator. There we go, we backspaced the 1, and as you can see again with the 0 and the 2, it didn't work to use the type key .delete here. But as you can see, our test passed. So let's go ahead and let's copy this code here, and we will replace the delete type key here since that didn't really work. And we'll rerun our test one last time just to be sure that everything is working well. There we go, we've got our sign in button. We should be checking for our progress indicator. And there we go, we've changed the first number and the second number, and our answer is 3. Great. So now that's our second case of a happy path test where everything works as expected. So let's go ahead and let's do another test. And in this test, let's test that an error is displayed when the user enters a negative number. There we go. And again, you can see that we don't have our record button, so let's click off that line and click back in. There we go. We can try to click it, and it's not even going to register and let us run a simulator unless our play button is here. So let's just force a rebuild by rerunning a test and just immediately stopping it. Cool. And then let's click record. Nice. So now we've got our app up and running. So let's go ahead and let it finish building. Alright, so now we've got our sign in button, so we'll click sign in. We'll make sure our progress indicator's there. And then let's change our first number to a -1, and our second number we will change to 2. And then we'll click calculate, and we should have error, no negative numbers are allowed. Very cool. So now let's jump back to our test and stop the recording. Alright, and as we know from previous experience, it's going to immediately try to tap this first number, and that's not going to work. So let's just go ahead and save ourselves the trouble here. And we can leave the element named element, but we won't tap it just yet. We will say let element exists, and we will say that we want our element to wait for existence, and again we'll give it a good 5 seconds. And we will assert true that our element exists before moving on to the next step, which is tapping that text field. And then, as we know also from our previous test, this type key of delete doesn't actually delete it as we would expect. So we'll copy our delete code from our test above here, and we'll replace it with that delete key pressed there. And then same thing for this one. Let's go ahead and replace the delete for the second one with this key here. And this is interesting. It looks like it tried to tap the second element twice, so we don't need to tap that twice. Let's go ahead and just let it tap the element one time. And there we go. So, and then we'll change the text to 2. Then we'll tap calculate, and then we make sure that error, no negative numbers allowed, exist on the page. Great. So let's run that test and see what we get. Alright, so the app is built. It's clicking sign in, should be checking for our progress indicator. Cool, it got rid of the 0 and replaced it, and our error, no negative numbers allowed displayed. Great, and our test passed first try. Alright, and with that, we've been able to add UI testing to our app. If you got value from this video, then please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you leave a comment, just be nice about it. That's all I ask. Thanks. Have a great day.